Hey everyone, my name's Sherry. By day I am a software developer, and by night I'm a crafter. Nah, just joking. When I was 23, I bought a condo and it was a foreclosure, and I renovated it for the last 8 years. And I finally sold it last summer and bought this house about 5 months ago. And there have been a lot of projects that we worked on. Today, we will be talking about the raised garden bed that I made. The reason I decided to do this is because we renovated our kitchen, and we had about 3 or 4 pallets, wooden pallets, just stacked up in our garage. I didn't want to throw them away. There was some good wood on there, so I wanted to use it. So I looked up on a video about building a raised garden bed out of pallet wood. And then this project developed. I saw a few different designs. Most of them were just horizontally, just long bits of wood, but I tend to like more cottage core inspired stuff, so I decided to do this design. So it's a little wonky, a little quirky. My doggo. So one of the other inspirations for doing this is because I wanted to grow some stuff. Our yard is terrible. It's based on just clay, Texas clay, so this little guy kept on getting all muddy. I've done a bunch of work on the yard, so it's not like that anymore in most places. I tried a few different ways to demo all the pallets. First one, just hammer and crowbar. It's this is an easy thing. Shouldn't be too bad. It's just wood held in by nails, right? Wrong. I quickly realized why a bunch of the tutorials I saw were using a saw. So I went and got my jigsaw, and that turned out to be a pretty good option. So I did that for the majority of the pallet. About halfway through, my hand started hurting real bad because I had to keep on a lot of pressure on the jigsaw to get it to move through all those boards, even though I had a new blade on it. And the gloves I was wearing were maybe a little bit too snug, so I started almost developing a little blister. And I decided to try out a circular saw. I was like, oh, I saw them use this. Should be fine. I realized that the way that the pallets were built, it's not in the most square way. So the wood was probably bending around where the blade was and putting a lot of pressure on it, hence all the smoke that happened. I also probably need to put a new blade on it, but yeah, I quickly gave up on it and went back to using hammer and crowbar for a little bit just to give my hands a rest, and then back to the jigsaw. So here's the montage of the satisfying jigsaw version. after getting all of the wood off the pallets, a lot of the edges were jagged, not square. So I decided to use my miter saw to make all the edges as square as possible. And then came the actual assembly process. It took a lot of time lining up, finding the right boards to make it look as random as possible. Some places I was limited by the width of the boards, so you see me switching out a bunch of random boards, trying to get a little design that was more cottage inspired than a regular style. Here I'm just using another board to try to line up the bottom of the boards, so when I do put it on the ground, it'll sit as flat as possible, and I hopefully won't have to adjust the levelness of the ground as much. For this part, I am making sure to drill all the pilot holes because this wood is pretty thin, and if you do just screw right into it, it splits the wood and ruins the entire piece of wood. So sanding for me is always not so much of a fun job because I am allergic to pretty much every tree, and this just kicks up everything, and for the next 2 days I pretty much have a cold. But I do like the result of it. Makes it all smooth, no splinters, and helps to bring out the actual natural color. So here is where I think my sander has ran out of battery. So take it out and go get a new one, charged one. And then I feel defeated because I realize it's not the battery. My handy dandy sander has died. I'm still trying. I'm so sad. It was my favorite one. So I had to finish out the job with my not so favorite one. This is a trick I learned from watching The DIY Wife, using my leaf blower to blow off all the sanding dust. To seal the wood, I looked up a bunch of different ways to do it. One of the best suggested ways I found was using boiled linseed oil. You just have to brush it on or sponge it on and then let it sit for 24 hours so the oil absorbs into the wood as much as possible. And then you should be good to go. So I ended up using some bags of soil to assist me in holding up the sides as I screwed them together. Now what I'm doing here is adding a block of wood to the inside. It's just helping strengthen up what we have there. What you doing up there? Where's your home at? Really? You're very vocal. Oh, really? Is that so? Oh, really? So after everything was assembled, I went to my yard to find a spot that I wanted to put it in. There's this one area off of our deck that gets great sun. It's probably the only area that gets a decent amount of light in our backyard. I try to make it as large as possible. So I think I came up with like a 6 by 4 foot like area. After adding the brick base, I added some pavers around the edges so I could actually access everything. And then came the time to actually move the pallet I had been working on for days at this point into place. Took a little bit of maneuvering with the bricks because not all of them were level, and maybe the sides that I made were not completely square, which is okay because I'm using found materials. It's not bought from a store. And then decided to add some plastic sheeting around the inside of the garden bed to help, I don't know, like I was worried about rot because I don't know how old these boards are or how durable they are. So I thought that maybe adding the sheeting around it would help reduce the rot that would be coming in future years. And there were also, like, all of the boards weren't exactly aligned, so I wanted to keep the soil inside, and that would probably help. Then I lined the bottom of the garden bed with cardboard. I've seen people do this for a few reasons, mainly to help keep weeds from growing into the garden bed. But like I said before, not much is growing in our yard anyways. So my main reason was because I wanted to add in like a vermicomposting system. So I wanted to keep worms within the garden bed, and I didn't want them to escape into my yard. So there was a big discussion about how to fill a garden bed. I decided to go with what's called a hugel system. The main idea is that you want to fill up as much of the garden bed as possible with stuff you can find around your yard. So on the bottom, there's usually logs, cut up tree limbs, anything larger. And on top of that, you add in some twigs, smaller tree limbs, and fill up on top of that with leaves, twigs, grass clippings, anything that will pretty much break down over time. So I went around my yard and looked for limbs from trees that were like dying off a little bit, or maybe there were a few that were kind of almost growing into my neighbor's roof. So I trimmed the tree around that and put all of that in the garden bed. Also, there are a bunch of bushes in my front yard. Some of them had died from a frost last year. So I trimmed those up a bit and put them in there. And then came the leaves. We have so many leaves that we've had to take out of our yard. That tree that's off the deck right there, it has dropped leaves since we bought this place in the fall. And for reference, it's the middle of April. We're still cleaning leaves off. In the bucket, I added some of this expanding coconut coir, which is a different type of soil you can use to start seeds with. You have to essentially put it in a bucket or a bowl and let it sit, and it will expand to a few times its size. My plan is to add in a few different things. So the garden soil, the coconut coir, some worm castings, and a bucket that I'm going to use for the worm composting, which has a bunch of holes drilled out of it, and the bottom is completely open. This allows the worms to go into the rest of the garden bed and come back whenever there is some kitchen scraps in there. Then we fill the base with like bedding for worms. So it can be like leaves, it can be shredded paper, coconut core, shredded cardboard. I bought a pack of, I think, 500 worms, dumped that in there, made sure they were okay. I put my kitchen scraps in there, not too much. I filled it with some more shredded newspaper, wetted it all down a little bit, and then covered it with some worm blankets, which is really just coconut fibers that were pressed. Closed it up and wished that everything would go right. Finished it off by kind of having an experiment. So back when I lived in a condo, I had a little patio and I tried to grow a bunch of herbs. I tried to grow vegetables and a few fruits, but I couldn't control the environment around me. So a lot of it was eaten up by insects or ants. And it was real hot up there because we were in the second story. There's no ground, so everything would dry out really quickly. And it was very hard to regulate that. So I had seeds that had expired 5 years ago. I thought I would attempt to see if anything would grow. So I planted those around the top of the garden bed. And I finished it off with some random potatoes from our pantry that had started sprouting, just to see if that would work. For the most part, it's working okay. I did have some like gnats or flying insects that have gotten in there a little bit. There have been some ants that have actually gotten in there. So they have a little colony starting. I don't know really how that's gonna work out with the worms, but I've still found a few worms in there when I've gone to turn it. I hope you enjoyed this. I'm mostly using these videos to document the projects that I've been working on. But I also have a few friends that were interested in what I was doing, and I've always talked about it, but it's hard for a lot of people to understand how much work goes into this type of thing. So hopefully these videos can have some insight on that. And that's it for today. See you next time. Bye.